shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Behave yourselves!
Hello, YouTubers out there. This is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So today we're looking at the 35th anniversary of Back to the Future Part 2. AMC had a what they call Fathom event, which many of you may be aware of, where they show older films, classic films that celebrate a certain anniversary date, and they show them. So at the AMC theater that I frequent, they're also showing Hocus Pocus, which celebrated its 30th anniversary last year, and they're also showing Nightmare Before Christmas, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary from last year as well. So both of these films, because of Halloween, I guess they are running them. But they're also running Back to the Future Part 2, or at least they did. I think it was, yesterday was the last day. Monday the 21st. So, I went to see it. And initially I was going to see something else, but I thought, you know what? Let me go see this in a theater. And as I've always said, I think the theatrical exhibition of a film is the most honest way to watch any movie, particularly something you've already seen before or that you've never seen in a theater. So here we are. Now, Back to the Future Part 2, a little bit of history. I saw the film back in, I think it was just before Thanksgiving in 1989. Hence, of course, 35 years ago, which is the year that I graduated high school. How strange is all of this? It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but I guess it was. So, I saw the film, and it was a packed house, and nobody was really, except for a couple of things, nobody was really laughing. The movie is supposed to be something of a comedy, to some degree, it should be. And it just, you could tell the audience was not into this film at all. Except for a couple of kids, maybe, during the action-filled moments with Marty McFly and his hoverboard. And as always, there's always an older gentleman in the back who, you know, seems to laugh in certain places. I always have the same person in the back. I don't know, it's a weird thing. Not when I saw the movie last night, again, but anyway. So, then came, and, well, this is filled with spoilers, but I'm sure everybody knows this. At the end of Back to the Future Part 2, there is the words "to be concluded." It's kind of the intertitle that's thrown in there, which actually, when Back to the Future, the original, came out, had the same thing. It didn't say "to be concluded," it said "to be continued." And you could tell, again, the audience was like, you know, a lot of groans. Then came, which I read Ebert's review. Apparently Russ Meyer used to do this, which I did not know. And it's happened on occasion in other movies, but not very frequently. It was unusual back then. They had a teaser trailer for Back to the Future Part 3. It said, Summer 1990, Back to the Future Part 3. And you could tell, again, the audience was like, no. So the response was less than stellar, to say the least. Now, later on, I mean, I saw Back to the Future Part 3 in theaters because I wanted to see how it ended. I wasn't really I wasn't anticipating much, but because I just didn't care for Part 2 at the time. And I saw Part 3, and I liked it a lot. It was very enjoyable. It was very funny. It had all the elements that we expected Part 2 to have. And that mixture of pathos and emotion and laughs and humor and action and whatever that the original film had. And Part 2 is like that middle child that just, it's typical of most trilogies. It's a little darker, and it doesn't resonate emotionally the same way as the others. Now, one of the best middle part trilogies ever was Empire Strikes Back. I think that still is not only the best Star Wars film ever made, for me, it's also one of the best fantasy movies ever made. And it didn't matter if it ends on a cliffhanger, which it sort of does, kind of, open-ended, and not a rousing finish. but it was exemplary in every way. Now, so after I saw part 3, I then later on, after some time, I decided to look back at part 2 again. And the movie, I gotta say, it's a movie that is actually quite entertaining, but it is so different from the original film. It's not a rehash. It's one of the few sequels that really manages to not rehash the original so much as create a whole new story, which it managed to do. And I think most of you know what the story is, so I'm not going to go through the beats. I will say one thing. First of all, the film is dark. It's sort of a nightmare, the movie. And from director Robert Zemeckis, it shares some of that nightmarish quality of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Just a little bit. It teeters on that level, just a little bit. But a couple of things about the film still bother me. Number one is, and it was unavoidable, I guess, Marty McFly's father, George McFly, is played by an actor named Jeffrey Wiseman, who, if you look at some of the behind-the-scenes photos, it looks like he has puffed-up cheeks and doesn't quite... He sort of has the look of Crispin Glover from the original, but not quite. He doesn't really have any lines in the movie. He's just sort of always receding in the background, except for whatever reason, in the future part of the film, 2015, now that's our past, how interesting, he's upside down, and it's to help his back. So this way they can avoid showing his face, clearly, because that's the only reason I imagine that was done. I don't know that for sure. I don't remember all the trivial behind-the-scenes stuff. But they couldn't get Crispin Glover because he wanted a lot of money, and it wasn't worth it to the studio, to Zemeckis, to everybody else. And also they used footage from the original film of him without his permission, and that also was a bit of a problem. So Crispin Glover never returned to Back to the Future series at all. It just, and then, there's his death. George McFly's death in 1973, when he's apparently shot and killed by Biff, played in a performance that I believe should have been, now seeing it again, I always thought Thomas F. Wilson was very talented. But this performance, which has different shades, as Biff, Griff, older Biff, young Biff, in Back to the Future Part 2, deserved an Oscar nomination. He is fantastic. But, the Academy normally doesn't look at anything comical and award it with a nomination, unfortunately. So that's kind of their history. Unless it's a straight actor, not a comedian, playing a different role, like Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie. That's a subject for another video for the future. So Biff had killed George McFly. Now, I had remembered sort of that a little bit. I'd seen Part 2 a few times. I haven't seen it nearly as much as the original or Part 3. And this is my second time seeing it in the theater. And then married Lorraine. So this is what happens when the Sports Almanac, as you all know, from 2015, old Biff overhears Marty and Doc, played, of course, in another terrific performance by Christopher Lloyd. Marty, of course, Michael J. Fox. Marty wants to bet on the Sports Almanac. So when they go back to 1985, there are all these records of wins from 1950 to 2000. And I can't lose, and this kind of thing. Hey, we can play some bets. No, you can't. I want to destroy this thing, and that kind of thing. And old Biff overhears it, knows there's a flying DeLorean that he remembers from 30 years earlier. How can you forget that, And then he steals the DeLorean, goes back to 1955 to pretty much the same date as the original Back to the Future film. So that creates more paradoxes and more alternate timelines. I like that idea, the alternate 1985. It has that It's a Wonderful Life mixed in with a Christmas Carol type vibe to it, and I really like that. I always think that works. It's it goes to show how dark it can be, how dangerous it is what Doc and Marty are doing, and Doc, of course, wants to destroy that time machine. But something else happens in the film, and it turns out that Biff because of access to this almanac and to being one of the richest people on Earth, pretty much owning Hill Valley, and owning the police and all this other stuff. The original Biff, if you think about it, from the first Back to the Future film, was really just a bully. That's all. I mean, he wasn't the worst guy in the world. He wasn't exactly really the villain. I mean, he wanted to break George's arm. I mean, okay, he was a tough bully to be sure, but I didn't really see him as a villain of Back to the Future. Just, you know, a threat to get rid of, basically. But in part 2, he turns out to be actually quite evil. And I'll tell you one scene, other than the Biff of 1980s trying to kill Marty with a gun. There's an earlier scene in a picture, or a later scene, I should say, that happens in an earlier timeline, 1955, when Biff is driving and he's got the almanac, he's hearing the sports figures, and there's Marty on the hoverboard trying to take the almanac from him. And then they're struggling as he sees he's, trying to get the almanac. And there's a scene where the edge of a tunnel, he not crashes into it, but he drives into it, and he thinks he has killed Marty. It's a very ugly scene. It's very ugly. It was maybe a little too ugly, I thought, in hindsight. I always had an issue with that. It just felt like this really shouldn't be happening in Back to the Future. That was just too dark. Other than that, I think my other issue with the film is the fact that there are no real emotional stakes. In the first Back to the Future, it was about Marty trying to get his parents to be together, to kiss at this Enchantment Under the Sea dance so that he could be born. And there was a real emotional resonance to that. But in part 2, it's really just, I have to get the almanac because we got to prevent Biff from doing what he's going to do. The emotion is not quite there. We see him as the villain. And really, it just doesn't operate on the same way. Lorraine McFly doesn't quite figure into the action the same way. It's just not quite there. However, the film has an addictive mentality. It's the kind of picture that you can watch it and you say, yeah, I'm going to watch it again because of how it ties into part 3. And it is so uniquely different from the original film. Even though it revisits the original film, it's still unique. It's still different in every way. I mean, it's just much more chaotic, much more paradoxical. But the irony is that because of that, the emotion isn't quite there. Because again, we don't have emotional stakes here. We have a matter of urgency about Biff, but you don't feel emotionally connected to it. Whereas in the original film, you were connected to those parents. Also, it's a tough act to follow. I mean, Back to the Future is one of really the few perfect fantasy sci-fi type movies ever made. And making a sequel was going to be a tough act to follow no matter what. It's kind of like, here you are at the very top level of what this can be. And now you have to sort of match up and come up with something that is on that same level. You're not going to quite get there. And the two sequels, I don't think ever quite managed to rise to the heights of the original film. Even though there are things I do enjoy about part 2. Again, I like Michael J. Fox in it. He's quite agile. His reactions to things, especially the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, seeing himself performing Johnny B. Good. I like a lot of that. And of course, Thomas F. Wilson is fantastic, and I love Christopher Lloyd. So those were the things that worked best. Elizabeth Shue was not the right actress to play the part of his girlfriend. Sorry to say, I respect the actress. I think she's good. She was the wrong choice to play Jennifer. And they didn't do much with the character anyway. And so even in part 3, it's basically a little cameo. I mean, she's just not a part of the proceedings at all. They would have benefited from finding some other way. They could have actually changed it so that maybe she wouldn't get in the DeLorean. But leaving that aside, part 2, though, has its place. Talking about greed a little bit, how an entire town is overrun by criminals. That is the alternate 1985. I mean, a lot of that stuff was really quite dark, but very interesting. But it just doesn't resonate the same way as the original film. So that's just what I think. It's not interested so much in the people as much as in the paradoxes. But on that level, though, it still is kind of entertaining. But it does have a meanness to it. And some of it is just a little bit uglier than it should have been. But I still respect the picture, and I liked what Zemeckis did. It's certainly the darkest of the trilogy. As I said, most middle parts are. So, let me your thoughts. Tell me what you think about Back to the Future Part 2. Interesting thing, too, is that at that time, I have to say, when I saw Part 2 and 3, after I saw them, I thought, people are not going to... these sequels will just be what they are, and people may enjoy them in the future, but it's really the original film that's going to stand tall against the others. And it turns out that the other two entries, particularly Part 2, have entered the pop culture lexicon. And they are inextricably linked to the original film. So it turns out they're just as popular, and probably more so, than when they first came out. How interesting is that? That's very odd to me. But anyway, let me your thoughts. Tell me what you think about Back to the Future Part 2. Did you like it? Where does it fall for you in the trilogy? Do you like it even more than the first film? Or more than the third? You think it's the worst one? Whatever. Tell me your thoughts. Lend me your ears. And I guess that's all I got to say about that. I'll return with more videos very soon. I've been a little busy. I'm going to try my best to do more videos. And that's all I got to say. By the way, check out Caddo Lake. It's playing on Max. That's a really good film. Speaking of time travel. It's not exactly time travel, but it falls in that category. It more time slips, that kind of thing. Time displacement. Check it out. Watch it. If you do, please tell me what you think of it. I probably should do a video on it, but we'll see. I wrote about it, but anyway, let me your thoughts and what you think of the Back to the Future trilogy. If you aren't a subscriber, please subscribe to my channel. I discuss movies and in all sorts of different facets. And if you are a subscriber, thank you. And please hit the notification bell for future uploads. That's all I got to say about Back to the Future Part 2, 35 years. I cannot believe it. And this is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.